In this tutorial, we want to talk about the list tagging element. We have already demonstrated it on the example of a simple text, but now we want to do it in practice in the example which is a common scenario, and that is repeating some table row based on the lines of the document. In this case, it will be purchase order lines. For that, obviously, I don't need all these 3 table rows. I need just 1 table row, and I want to repeat it with every purchase order line. So I can easily delete these 2 table rows, but I will intentionally leave the table rows and delete just the content, because I will use these additional table rows for some other examples. To make it very clear what is happening, I will intentionally color this table row in, let's say, this light orange. And now I want to say, whenever there's a new purchase order line, repeat this orange table row with all of its content. For that, while the table row is selected, we click the list tagging element. And here in the binding, we must provide the binding source. It will be purchase order lines. We can just double click them. If you remember, we have 7 purchase order lines in our data source, and for each of them, this whole content is simply repeated. Right now, everything in this table row is static, that's why it's simply repeated without any difference. And these numbers, 1 to 7, they don't have to do anything with Docentric, they are the plain word numbering, as you can see here. Next thing we want to do is, instead of these fixed values, to bring the values from the fields on a purchase line that is currently being rendered. So let's do that on the example of this description. Instead of it, we will say field tagging element, and we want to bind it. Now, this is very important concept. So far, we were adding the elements that were on the top level of our element tree structure. They didn't have parents. And for that reason, until now, in the binding, we were offered only these 3 data sections: parameters, main data, general data. Now, for the first time, we are adding the element which is a child of a parent. And because of that, we are also offered this additional data context. We should understand it as, give me the value that is on the same level or in the same context of the field I am currently adding. So if I want to add any field from the line that is currently rendered, I need to say, give me the values from the current data context. And in 99% of the cases, that is exactly what you want to do when you are adding the field within some list tagging element. And that is what I will do now. So I will point from the context of the current purchase order line. See, it is the same element as the parent of the current field. Give me its name. We see here on the left side that we now got some different content in every line, and we can double check that these values came from these lines. We can scroll to the right until we reach this field, name. We see these values here, wiring harness, mid-range speaker unit, and so on, appearing here on the left side. And that is what we expect to get. But this is a situation where we often see mistakes with the beginners. We call them number 1 beginner's mistake. So let me demonstrate the number 1 beginner's mistake. You don't understand this data context, or you simply oversee it and ignore it, and then you think, I don't know what this data context is, I know where my data is. It is in main data, purchase order lines, name. And this is what will happen. We got all the 7 names from all the 7 lines, concatenated into one long string and repeated with each line. Why is that? That's because we told our renderer, whenever you are rendering line number 1 or 2 or 3 and so on, ignore the values on that particular line. That would be data context. No, but go from the top of the report data source, where our renderer sees all 7 lines in this particular case, and we told him, give me the names from all the 7 lines. And the only thing it's new to do with them was to take them all together, concatenate them, and give us one long string. So I will move back to the correct binding, and this concatenation happened because this field is the string type. Let's see what will happen if we do the same mistake on the non-string value, in particular in this case on the quantity. I will first add the field tagging element, and I will first do the correct binding so that we see the correct result from the context of current purchase order line. I want the quantity and I want N0 format applied. We got the correct result, but now let's modify the binding and make it from the main data, from all lines, all quantities. Notice now that we got the conversion error. That is because now renderer didn't know what to do with all these 7 values. So whenever you get a conversion error or concatenated values from all lines, that is a clue for you that you got the wrong binding, you went outside of the context of the current line, and you are trying to work on the whole set of the data, which is not correct. Notice also this here, it's another clue that something is wrong with the binding. This is the correct binding. Here we have a parent, purchase order lines, and here we have the child name. That is good and correct binding. This is incorrect binding, where we have here parent and then here again parent and child. So these are all clues that the binding is wrong. This kind of binding, conversion error, repeated or concatenated values. Let's move this back to the correct value, quantity. And we can do the same thing quickly with other fields. I will do it on few more fields, like in this unit I will say field tagging element bound from the context of current line to purchase unit takes there. As you have noticed earlier, when the field tagging element is added, it is filled with the name of the field. But that is only for the convenience of a person working on this design, because it's completely irrelevant otherwise. It's completely removed and replaced by the values from the sample data in preview time and by the values from report data source in runtime. So you can leave it as it is here, but if it bothers you that the long text will be wrapped around and this design will be ruined, it won't be what you expect to get, even though if the value is short, it will be nicely rendered here. You can modify this and make it something short but still meaningful to you. So yeah, I will delete all of the remaining characters and make something like this. Let's say this amount here, I will also modify it and say that it is the field tagging element bound to, from the context of the current line, bound to line amount, and I will give it also N2 format. You could go further and say instead of this use the currency code, here instead of these values delivery, discount amount, discount percent, and so on. But this was enough for the first and initial demonstration of the list tagging element. Let's show a few other things. A common requirement might be to list not all lines that we have in our data source, but only the lines that fulfill a certain condition. Let's say that I want to list only the lines that have a quantity above 1000. Let me demonstrate how to do that, and for that I will use some other color. So I will say, for example, this green table row, I want to repeat it for every purchase order line having quantity above 1000. Similarly to the previous case, while the row is selected, I click the list tagging element. I bind it again to purchase order lines, but I'm not going to double click, I will just single click, and here I need to provide the condition for filtering. I can type it here because it's a very simple condition, but I will click this pencil so that we bring this dialog with XPath editor to a focus. How do we provide filtering conditions? We use this kind of parentheses, and here in the middle I need to provide the condition. We can do something like this. This is known to people who are familiar with SSRS. What does this mean? This means give me just the first purchase order line. If I now say OK, there's only one first purchase order line, so in that case I expect to get just one green table row. Let's do that quickly. So that's correct, and let's add this name so that we know what was rendered here. So I will say give me field tagging element and bind it from the context of current line to its name. Now it's clear that this was the first line. But it wasn't what I wanted to demonstrate. I wanted to demonstrate how we will filter the lines having quantity above 1000. While this list tagging element is selected, I will right-click and say Edit Expression. And here, instead of saying just give me the first line, I will delete this condition. What do we need to do? Something like this, quantity. Notice our kind of notation that we have parent / child / next child and so on until we reach the field, which always has to start with @field name. So we need actually @quantity, and I can type it or I can select it from here. So I will expand purchase order lines and reach this quantity and double click. It goes here where the selection is. So filter purchase order lines having the quantity above 1000. I expect when I click OK to get these 4 rows, these 4 lines presented here below. As expected, we got 4 green table rows for these 4 lines. We can add also quantities here or anything else that we want. So quantity in N0 format. This was the demonstration of using the list tagging element. We saw that we need to bind it to some expression that can be either a collection of data or collection of data with some condition. We have finished explaining the list tagging element, and the next in the series will be our if tagging element.